Generation and Marketing webinar series. My name is Dave Patterson. I'll be the moderator today. I'm just going to give you a few quick notes about how the webinar works and about how our new tool here with GoToMeeting. And then after that, I'll be turning it over to Jean Edworthy, who will be welcoming our speaker and introducing the session. So for those of you who have not used GoToWebinar before, you'll see a dialog box on the right-hand side of your screen. In there, you'll be able to access the chat window. That's the best place, either the chat or the question window, to ask questions as we go. We'll be fielding those questions as we go along. In order to keep things moving smoothly, we've got all of our attendees are on mute. So use that chat window to reach us, please. You will be able to see the speaker in your window through the video window, but don't worry, we can't see you. So with that sort of housekeeping out of the way, it is my pleasure now to introduce Jean Edworthy, a member of the COC Board of Directors and Chair of the Marketing and Revenue Generation Committee, to introduce our session today.
Well, thanks, Dave, and welcome everybody. We're excited to bring you this series of best-in-class speakers to share their experiences, their knowledge, and their pearls of wisdom in the marketing and revenue sector. Our first three webinars dealt with developing a marketing and revenue generation strategy, developing a sponsorship plan, and developing your sport brand. Our topic today is philanthropy in sport. The best-in-class NSF assessments that were done by our COC partners and colleagues at Deloitte made it clear that philanthropy was an area where we as a sports sector have a lot of work to do. The good news is that we've identified a potentially vital source of funding for our NSFs that to date has gone largely untapped. We think today's webinar can be among the first steps towards benefiting from the fundraising potential of this area. Today's lead presenter is Leanne Nicolle, Executive Director of the Canadian Olympic Foundation. Leanne has an incredible track record in philanthropy, having led key philanthropic campaigns for Plan Canada and having founded Girl Impact Youth Empowerment, as well as Ubuntu Marketing. Leanne is a leader in the philanthropy field and is arguably the top leader in the sport philanthropy in Canada. As always in this series, we want to hear from our sport community and find out what our colleagues are doing in the field. So today, Leanne will be joined by longtime leader in the sports sector, Greg Matthew. Greg, as most of you know, is the CEO of Cycling Canada, where he is spearheading a new and very important philanthropic giving campaign designed to help Cycling Canada connect with the enormous cycling community in Canada. We're all looking forward to hearing from both of you today, and Leanne, it's my pleasure to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Jean, and I appreciate being here and feel like it's quite an honor to be giving this little chat today. I want to make it as much as possible a dialogue. I feel like our team here at the Canadian Olympic Foundation has a lot to offer and a lot of advice, I would say, but really it's a two-way street in that we've learned an incredible amount in the short tenure that we've been working on the Canadian Olympic Foundation together, and thanks to all of our conversations with many of you in the sport community, we feel like we've developed an opportunity for us all to learn from each other. So thank you for including me, and without further ado, we'll get right started. The agenda today is quite simple. A small introduction about what philanthropy is and why it's important. We're going to work on the development cycle together, so we'll spend most of our time on that development cycle so you understand the steps required to making sure that you get revenue in the door from a philanthropic perspective. A donor pyramid, and then we're going to give you some takeaways so you can start working on your strategy, your philanthropic strategy immediately following today. So maybe it's something you can do in the afternoon. So just a quick introduction about fundraising. And a lot of conversations that we've had have been really with people in the National Sport Federations or sport partners, where fundraising has actually been piled on to the many tasks that you already have to do. And I do want to share with you and emphasize that fundraising is actually a profession. many of us here at the Canadian Olympic Foundation have made fundraising our profession. It is backed by an association of fundraising professionals. There's education around it. There's a lot of activity that you can do to build up your skills around fundraising, but it's not something that is inherent. So it's not something that I would say can be done off the side of your desk, so to speak. It does require some effort, and it requires a little bit of knowledge and skill in order to be successful at fundraising. So there is a difference, I would say, between generating funds and activity. So we confuse philanthropy with fundraising in some capacity. For example, if you're selling T-shirts with your logo on it, or if you're having a bake sale, or if you're selling tickets to an event, it is fundraising, but it isn't necessarily philanthropy, or it's a form of fundraising, but it's not exactly what we call philanthropic effort. So although you're inviting potential donors to participate, if you don't keep following through the process, then it's just that. It's one-time activity that you can gain from. So like I said, this is an activity, your fundraising efforts, they have to be a focus. It's not something you could do today and not do for another year and expect to be successful at it. It has to be full circle. But having said that, because I know that there's various levels of organizations on the webinar today, we hope that we can give you some tips and starting points that you can use moving forward despite the size of your organization. If you're small national sport federations, there are huge advantages actually in philanthropy that will benefit you. And if you're a large, more developed organization, then there's activity that will also benefit you. So what is fundraising or philanthropy? But fundraising is a combination. It's part art because you have to be very creative. So when you're talking to a donor, for example, you have to listen very carefully, and even on the fly, you have to almost create a program that isn't necessarily in a box that benefits the donor. So oftentimes we think, well, we'll just go sell a program into the donor. Well, in fact, it's almost the opposite, whereas you have to think of your programs through the lens of the donor. So there is an art side of it, a very creative side to it. On the flip side is science, where there are certain metrics, which I'll share with you today, that will determine how much you can actually raise from your donor base. It's very scientific, it's number-based, it's been proven over and over and over again. So fundraising is this combination of art and science. It requires creativity, and it requires science in order to be successful. And I love this quote because I think it's super relevant to what we're talking about, but fundraising is an extreme sport. You have to sharpen your elbows. This is not for the faint of heart. So, but the end result is mostly worth it. So stay with me, and I think that you'll understand at the end of the seminar that you can be part of an extreme sport. Not just the X Games, not just you freestyle if you're out there. So what is one of the first thing that I did when I came to the Canadian Olympic Foundation? You know, the mandate was, as told to me, that you need to come in and raise money for athletes. That was it. You need to come in and raise money for athletes. Well, that sounds like it would be easy to do, but actually it's not easy at all, because if you look at my competitive set, I'm, competing with not competing with the COC, but I'm competing with the COC partners. So you've got RBC, you've got Hudson's Bay, you've got all of the national partners, Canadian Tire, that are funding sport. You also have the Government of Canada funding podium sport. So if I go to a donor, how do I go to them and say, hey, could you give me $1 million for sport or for the athletes? When all of the communication around that has been, it's covered by the government and it's covered by corporate partners. So the first thing that I do, and this is exactly what you have to do, or you will have to do if you haven't done already, is understand where your gap is. So looking at the Canadian Olympic Foundation only as an example, I plotted many of the sport organizations from playground to podium and then local to national. And what you can see is that the local playground space is extremely crowded with all the pro team foundations that exist out there. So very crowded, lots of communication and buzz around that. At the playground national space, again, very crowded, starting with participation, just getting off the couch and get moving, to Jumpstart that actually funds sport directly for kids in need at the recreational level. There are very loud voices in the marketplace when you look at sport fundraising. Again, at the national podium space, extremely competitive between the Canadian Olympic Committee, B210, Athletes Can Fund, the sports centers, or now the sport institutes, WinSport, the National Sports Federation specific, CIS is out there. So at that podium space, there's a lot of activity and a lot of buzz and a lot of communication. What I found was there's a giant funding gap from just north of recreation, so entry in a high-performance sport. Right now we're saying at the provincial level, like Canada Games, just got back from Canada Games, to just south of the national team. Now, all of you know there's a giant funding gap there in all of your sports. So as the foundation, we elevated that conversation, not only internally here at the foundation with our board, but externally also. So we started that conversation on the development athlete. On the flip side, from a donor perspective, this is where we're not competing with RBC. We're not competing with Hudson's Bay. We're not competing with the Government of Canada at this point. So there is a donor conversation to be had there, which is what you're looking for. You're looking for your dollar actually will be super valuable in this space. So if you look at your gap, and arguably you may say that, well, we've got 1,000 different gaps. Well, unfortunately, you have to pick one or two off the top. You have to figure out what is the most appealing to the donor, because it can't be overhead, for example, because a donor, very few donors will fund overhead, even though that's a gap, and I understand you may have it, but a donor, very few donors understand how they understand the requirements of running an organization, but they definitely don't want to keep your lights on. They don't want to pay to keep your lights on. They expect that funding to come from other places. What I did then was layer it on the athlete experience, and this is what created our case for need. So we plotted across the podium pathway from playground to podium. We looked at, and these are rough numbers, so please don't hold me to them, but they're very rough numbers because it varies by sport. But playground is free. We have the highest level of participation. Recreation, if you're a marginalized family and you wanted your child to play rec sport, you could easily find funding around $300 from Jumpstart, KidSport, Timbits to fund your child's experience, to try a sport. The minute you get the tap on the shoulder as a parent to say, hey, your kid's really good, we want them to come out for the competitive team, not only does your price tag jump from $2,000 to $5,000, not including equipment and travel, but there's no funding available, or very limited funding. Even at the club level, as much as we try to put bursaries together from the club level or that entry level, it's still very difficult for a family who comes from marginalized needs to afford that competitive experience for their young person. So you get a significant drop-off there. The second drop-off is, even if you muddle through that competitive time, then the provincial experience between $5,000 and $10,000, sometimes more, we get a significant drop-off, and again, no funding available, or very limited funding available, I should say. And then at the national level, of course, if you haven't made the national team or national carding, but you're training with them, it's cost prohibitive for most families in the country. So that essentially is my case for need for the Canadian Olympic Foundation. It's very easy to explain to a donor. It's completely clear, and there's many times I've had the aha moment where a donor would say, I never even thought of that. So that sets up your case for need, or our case for need at the Canadian Olympic Foundation, but it has to be that clear, and there has to be this aha moment. And each one of you have definitely the opportunity to establish a very strong case for need depending on your donor pool.
So Leanne, before we jump ahead to Greg, I just thought this would be a chance for everyone to reflect a little bit about where they're coming from in their case for need, and thought we could ask the group about what philanthropic benefit do you find hits home best with your donors. So if everyone just take a moment and share your thoughts and vote in one of those options. That'll give us a sense of where you're coming from and might help inform the conversation with Greg and Leanne to follow here in just a moment.
Great.
So for those of you who hit Alt-Tab and went over to check your email quick, press Alt-Tab again. Come on back to this poll. Okay, we're closing in. We're at 80% of the crew has voted here, so we're 50 seconds in. So just quickly share those results with everybody. So it looks as though the helping HP athletes reach the Olympic podium is the thing that people are finding are resonating with their donor base, followed up by bridging gaps in the athlete development pathway, which I think, Leanne, you were just alluding to. So I think that gives a bit of a sense of where the group is and where we're approaching this, the idea of a case for need.
So Leanne, when you look at the case for need, you've become quite knowledgeable about cycling over the past 6 months in terms of what our case is and what we're looking to do. But how would framing a case for cycling differ from, say, a sport that doesn't have the same kind of mass participation base or an industry behind it?
So, thanks, Greg. A couple of things. First of all, I think that every sport can figure out, or sport partner can figure out where their most appealing gap is. So, let's say it's development athletes. What a development athlete looks like to cycling may look different to a developing athlete in freestyle, may look different than others. But for example, I think the best thing that you can do is frame it in I would say the difference is between a small NSF and a large NSF is that a small NSF, you actually have a really dedicated group of people who are finding you. So on the one side, you've got a donor pool who is like right there for the taking because they're actually working harder to find you than, say, in a cycling potentially, where there's lots of events, you can attend various venues, etc. So there's this opportunity for the smaller to mid-sized NSFs to capitalize on the donor pool that they have. I would work with a focus group, like we did with cycling, to find out where the gap is and what's most appealing to the donor. But I really don't think there's that much of a difference, to be honest with you. It's just maybe the scope may be different. But I think that the same, development of your case for need process is the exact same.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. And so let's move on to philanthropy. This is just a one-on-one, and like I said, I could speak on this for days, but for sure we want to take you through the 4 process parts of philanthropy. Number 1 is identification, and really that's about finding prospective donors. 2 is cultivation, and that really is about bringing the prospect or the prospective donor closer to your organization through communication, through events, etc. Solicitation this is the ask. This is the sales function of any organization. I worked in packaged goods consumer packaged goods for most of my career, and in sales, this is the exact same function. This is the sales function. And then stewardship, which is making sure that your donor stays in the franchise. So by sending thank you notes, recognition events, word of thanks, but making them feel loved. And that's the 4th phase of the philanthropic cycle. So let's start with identification. How do you start? How do you find those people that may be able to help you out from a philanthropic and financial perspective? And we are talking about finance here for the most part. We're talking about people who can make financial gifts. There may be some VIK or value in kind that they can offer, or time, which is different than actual philanthropy. So the first thing you're going to look at is, A, do your prospective donors have the capacity to make a gift? So if you're going to ask someone for $10,000, but they don't have the capacity to make a $10,000 gift, that will never happen. So it's about knowing who you're asking and how much they're actually worth. It takes some research. Sometimes it's easy to find, sometimes it's not, but it does take some giving. What is their affinity to your organization? And this goes back to the opportunity that small to mid-size that NSFs have, is that they actually have this group of supporters that find them versus them outreaching, having to outreach and make that effort. The bottom line is, if a donor doesn't have an affinity to sport or your sport, chances are they're not going to give you cash unless their friend, very good friend, asks them to. And then what's their propensity to give? Have they donated before? Do they have an affinity for a hospital or a university, or those oftentimes you can find their names on those just by Googling them, because they'll come up in some of the activity that other organizations do. So some people love to put their name out front and say, yes, I give a lot of money to a hospital, or yes, I give a lot of money to a university, and they put their name on it. Sometimes it's a little more difficult because they're anonymous givers. But the information is available, and it takes a little bit of digging, but not too much, especially since you should possibly, or you would possibly know, especially your immediate circle donors. So where do you find your prospects? First of all, your board. And I know that's not an easy conversation for most of you, and it certainly wasn't an easy conversation for me either, so I totally relate. But the fact of the matter is, your board is your biggest group of volunteers. And so whether or not they donate to you now or not, if your board doesn't give, if your board can't open their smartphone or their contact list, or they can't open their Rolodex, then you have to make sure that they understand that this is a part. So it may not be every single board member, because you need governance board members and you need various others in expertise in your skill matrix. But when you look at your board and you do your skills matrix for your board, make sure there's a fundraiser on there, or someone who has the capacity to give, because that is going to be the easiest group of people for you to outreach to. Your corporate partners, some of you have corporate partners. All of those corporates have leaders or people within the organization who have caused them to give you money. So find those people within your corporate partners and try to maybe even do some employee giving opportunities, but find people within your corporate partners. Why did they give to your organization? And find the people who actually put it forward to give to your organization or to sponsor your organization. Alumni. This is by far your biggest opportunity, because these people already buy into your sport. They're already, drinking your Kool-Aid, so to speak. So if you haven't started collecting your alumni data on a database, and I don't care if it's Excel or if it's the most sophisticated database that is out there, start collecting your data. Even if you're starting small, start collecting your alumni data and keep it up to date, because it's a big job, but when you're doing a mailing or you're doing an email blast, your alumni are the closest people that are going to be to you. Your volunteers, do you have any events? Do you host any events? Will you be at Pan Am? Will you be at any other World Cup events across the country? But these volunteers, they're volunteering with you for a reason. It's because they love your sport. So make sure that they become part of your database, and not just for time, but potentially, a small gift. A small gift is still philanthropy, because it's always the gift that you can make within your capacity. And then event attendees and fans. Many of you have ticketed events. If you don't have access to that data for those that bought tickets for your events, then get it, because these people have all bought tickets because they love your sport for the most part. So you should be able to communicate with them after, if it's just even thanking them for coming to the event, and have you ever thought of donating to our sport. Now, this is where the science comes in, because suspects are those people that you think may have the opportunity to give. So suspects would be event attendees and fans in a grand scheme of things, or they could be part of the Rolodex of your board, your board fundraiser. But your suspect to prospect ratio is 9 to 1. So for every 9 people that you speak to on a macro level, you're going to get 1 qualified prospect out of it. When you move that person to a prospect, you need 4 prospects in order to transfer into a conversion to a donation. So 9 suspects to 1 prospect, and then from that prospect, you need 4 of them in order to convert to a donor. This is proven over and over and over again. It may vary slightly, but not very much. So So that's how your identification process works, and regardless of your size, your size isn't an excuse here. We all have people we all have alumni, we all have board members, we all have volunteers potentially, we all have attendees and fans. So find a way to take that group of people who love your sport and turn them into people who would actually invest in your sport, because this is about investment.
So Leanne, that brings up a point from the group. We talked about just now about the importance of reaching out to people, and we thought we'd ask the group about what they're doing to reach out to their community now. So we're going to launch another quick poll, and this one's about your preferred method to reach your alumni. So again, we're talking specifically about alumni being a subset of the groups that Leanne just talked about, but one that we have a pretty good sense about here in sports. So we wanted to get a sense from the group about how it is you contact that group of people. Again, for those of you who haven't voted yet, it's just a quick Alt-Tab away. Okay, and so just to see those results, it looks as though our group skews fairly heavily to the passive side of things, and not contacting being the leading answer, but with 29%. But social media, newsletters, and direct mail all playing a role in that matrix as well, and just 10% who are directly contacting via the phone. So back to you, Leanne and Greg.
Okay, so Greg, I have a question for you. You're embarking on this Major Gifts campaign, and part of the campaign has been looking for campaign leadership. And it's not an easy task to find people who would actually lead your campaign. But can you just talk to us a little bit about that process and how the leadership of the campaign has benefited Cycling Canada?
Yeah, very much so, Leanne. First of all, I guess everybody gets into a room with people who say, our organization should be doing some of this. Well, we had a few of those people say that, and I heard them. So when I heard them, I said, you're right, and we need some people to help us do it, because it is sitting on the side of the CEO's desk, as a lot of things often do. So in some way, they self-identified their interest, and when they did that, and realizing a little too late that I had heard them, we were able to bring them into the conversation. And sure enough, those people now have become part of what we would call a working group that is trying to now build out the campaign cabinet. I think the second part of it is that you want to make sure that after people self-identify, that they also help you form the case to a degree. Certainly when you get to the point of getting the campaign cabinet in place, and certainly the co-chairs of that cabinet, they're going to want to have an effect on the case. Because they're the people that are ultimately going to be your sales force. At least that's the way I'm sort of looking at them. I'm not going to be the person who's out face-to-face with all the friends of the friends. They're going to be the people doing that kind of work. And for that reason, they have to both buy into the case, and if they haven't bought into it, force the rest of us in the working group to understand what it is that they believe should be done to make the case more saleable to the type of people that they believe are potential donor prospects. And I'll give you a little bit of an example of that, because I think we've learned it over a couple of programs that we've already done. I think it's easier for people who are taking on a leadership role to have sort of what they call the elevator speech, something that they can say to someone in 25 to 30 seconds, because that's the way their life is. And they want to make sure that they can hit all the key points. So if we go to them and we tell them all about the things that we're doing in the development of cycling, and on the coaching side, and on the competition side, and on the training side, and sports science innovations and equipment, and after a while their eyeballs roll back because there's so much to it that they just can't take it all in. Some people want that level of detail, and if they do, we have to make sure that we have people ready to give them that level of drill down to the detail. But a lot of them just want to identify with what they believe is a very worthy goal. So I think Ian Bird used to say we have to have big, hairy, audacious goals. And so certainly when we started to talk about our case study, or our case, one of our leadership people said, well, what we should be saying to people is we want to win the Tour de France, because everybody understands that. And we said, yeah, that's a really great, and it really is a big, hairy, audacious goal. But of course, you don't enter the Tour de France as a nation, you enter as professional teams. So we sort of modified that, and now we're down to, we want to win the World Cycling Championships, World Road Cycling Championships, which we've never done before. So that's going to be the sort of outlook that we put on it. And of course, to do that, you have to do all the high performance and development and coaching things underneath it. But if we put that goal out there, 95% of the people will understand it and its value. So those are the types of things I think that we're learning as we're trying to build our whole leadership cabinet.
Thanks, Greg. I think that one of the most important points that you had there is focus. And so it's very hard, like I said off the top, to identify a million gaps, but really focus on what the cabinet potentially would hone in on and draw emotional attachment to. So we learned that, I don't want to say the hard way, but definitely was part of the learning experience in our relationship between Cycling Canada and the Canadian Olympic Foundation. So moving on to cultivation, and really this is about showing donors the pathway to how they can help you. And it's about providing information. It's about bringing them into the inner circle, bringing them closer to you as an organization, closer to your sport. And it's about giving them inside information so they understand you better. And then when you've got them there, you've got their emotion. This is the emotional connector right now. There is some rational give them information stuff, but the more likely they have, if they have an affinity to you, the more likely they're not only to give you once, but to give again. So how do you do this? You have to stay in touch with them. And sharing competition results is a really good way that this group can stay in touch with their potential donor base. And it's not just about sharing the triumphs and how great we're doing and how awesome we are, because you have to create a bit of an emotional heartstring. So there's a lot of hope that needs to be communicated with the group that is in the cultivation phase. And sharing bad results is actually a way to bring them closer to your organization, because there is some empathy that comes with that. So by sharing both, this is what we're doing really, really well, and here are some areas that we need performance improvement, and if we had more funding, we could do really, really well at it. So that's sort of following the bouncing ball. But inviting this group of people to events, making connections with them with existing donors, sending newsletters or e-news, or call them. If you have someone live or something to say that is big news, pick up the phone, because we are in an email society right now. We rely on an email to communicate, and I don't know about you, but I get way too much email to the point where good news stories really fall through. I'm on a sort of as much of an email, from an email perspective, I read what's important, please read. So I think that phoning them in conversation is a bit of a lost art, and in most donor groups, this is much appreciated. And you'll know from who would prefer a phone conversation to who would prefer an email, but for the most part, a direct communication is really really important from a cultivation standpoint to bring them into your franchise. And I'm going to throw another question to Greg, because we recently had the Milton Pan Am Velodrome opening, and I know that there was some great activity there. So Greg, maybe you could share with the group the activity that you were able to capitalize on through the opening of the Velodrome just recently.
Yes, certainly, Leanne. Of course, opening a facility of the scale of the Pan Am Velodrome is a little bit of serendipity for an organization like ours, but I think what it also gave us the opportunity to establish ourselves within the potential donor community. And so one of the things we did is we worked with Toronto 2015 to make sure that we could have a very good VIP kind of experience attached to the event. And it was a little hard to do, to be honest, because there's no parking at the venue, so people had to ride school buses between the parking lot 3 kilometers away and the venue. which is not part of a VIP experience. For most people, would be on a cheese wagon for 10 or 15 minutes. But regardless of that, we worked our way through it, and the in-event experience and the in-velodrome experience was one where people had accreditation, they had access to specific areas, they had access to beverages and food services, and of course the results system and things of that nature. When we moved it up to the next level, of course, then it was an opportunity for them to do a little bit of sponsor activation as well. So we had a key sponsor who was also a Toronto 2015 sponsor that was able to bring people there for a day, and then the Canadian Olympic Foundation brought a group of their supporters in as well to see one of the Olympic sports that many of them are supporting. So all of those things together made it a very interesting environment for us to support and to see the kind of interest. And we had great interest across, well, we went from January 2nd to January 11th with 2 off days between the Canadian National Championships and international event. We had 6,700 people come out, and probably 20% of them, 15 to 20% of them, were there as VIPs at some point in time. So it was really a worthwhile experience.
Mm-hmm. It sure was.
Were you going to ask about Pan Am's as well, or did you ask me about that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. How are you planning to leverage Pan Am too? This is unrehearsed.
I'm glad you asked me that question. Well, of course, the thing we'll do again is we will invite prospects to attend, and I think now that you start to build a bridge with people, they have an interest in receiving the Cycling Canada newsletter or the Cycling Canada communiques, and they certainly do have an interest in being invited to things because they enjoyed their last experience, and you want to build on that type of opportunity. So we're going to be hosting a couple of friends and potential donor kind of events within the context of the games, and then we're also going to make sure that we have our campaign cabinet supporters available to the people so they can talk a little bit about what Cycling Canada is doing, both in a global sense, obviously at the games, and then in those areas of interest that the individuals have. So it's taking the next step, because we certainly saw at the velodrome opening that there are those people who want to know a lot more about your sport. They want to meet some of the participants. They look forward to meeting the athletes and talking to them about how their training is going and everything else like that. So creating those types of access opportunities, I think, is the key thing.
I completely agree. On to the solicitation, and this is the most fun, let's say, part of the process. It feels like it's obvious, but it's also the most unnerving, because you aren't quite sure, am I asking too much, am I not asking enough, what am I asking for, what are their interests? But it's not just about asking for a gift, it's about asking so many questions so that when you get to ask them for a gift, or you get to the point where you can ask for a gift, you feel like you really know the person. And it's sort of like the 3 cups of tea syndrome, where you don't ask on your first date for sure, but you get to know them quite well, and that all comes with being prepared. So if you know that you have a high net worth individual who's interested in your sport, just because they're a high net worth individual doesn't mean you can go and ask them for $10 million off the top. But having said that, if you know that they gave $100,000 to their alma mater, you don't ask them for $500. So it's about learning about their capacity, understanding them well, understanding, for example, we have what we call a conversation tree for us. We have really 6 buckets that we invest in with our Help Build an Olympian program. So nutrition, competition, equipment, coaching, daily training environment, and one more, sports science. So what we do is we say, okay, we find a donor that's interested in, let's say, medicine, for example, or health state. They're very interested in health state. They give to a certain, quite a few different, diabetes and cancer, etc. Could we take them through a conversation that helps them land in that sport medicine bucket? If a donor is really interested in mentorship and giving back through mentorship, we take them through a conversation that lands them in a coaching bucket. If our donor is really interested in performance, we take them through a conversation that lands them in the competition bucket, etc. So even though you know what your end goal is, you might start in a very different place. But this all comes with preparation and knowing what the interest of the donor or potential donor is. I think it's certainly critical. But the second point is, it feels obvious too, but it isn't the easiest thing. And if you're a salesperson, asking comes naturally. But this isn't necessarily the easiest thing for most people to do. So if you are super uncomfortable with asking for money from a donor or potential donor, bring someone who isn't, because that's where you can use your skill set to, with a board member, for example, who actually is used to raising money and used to making the ask. But don't be scared. Don't be scared to toot your own horn, identify your gaps. You know, you have to show a few of your warts in order to get the empathy of the donor. If it's all rosy, they're not going to donate to you. So make sure that you do really understand. It can't be a sob story either. And the challenge with sport in this part of the process is that it isn't disease state, so it's not cancer, it is not sick children, it isn't poverty, so it's not, you know, African child that has no access to food, it isn't the affinity like an alma mater or a private school where, well, I went, or a university where I went to school, so therefore I'll donate. It's a little bit different than that. And so this is a bit of a hierarchical conversation in that most young people in sport aren't starving in the literal sense, but the fact of the matter is we are super underfunded, and we don't have the access to sport that we need in this country. So it can be a patriotic play. It's definitely an athlete's play. Even if you have young athletes or athletes that are very well spoken, and you can bring them along, for example, maybe not necessarily in the solicitation call, but part of the process is a good way to do it. And the third point is, just do it. Like, what do you have to lose? Because you're starting at a point where that person's money isn't in your house yet. So if you don't ask, that person's money will stay in their pocket. So just do it. And once you get used to the feeling and used to it, then it actually becomes more natural and more easy. And I think one of the questions is that, well, that's a lot of rejection. You know, you're starting with 9-to-1 from a suspect to prospect and a 4-to-1 close rate. It's a lot of rejection. But it's also, when you make that sale, or you get that investment in your sport, it often translates to others. So just be mindful of it, and certainly don't be afraid of the solicitation process and asking. Ask a lot of questions. Greg.
So I have a two-part question for you now. As you start to talk a little bit about the broader concepts here of solicitation. First of all, is there a potential saturation point for donors if all the sports headed?
What, did we lose Greg? Or did you lose me?
Oh. Hi, Greg, you're back.
Okay.
People can hear me. Okay. All right. You didn't hear any part of that, Leanne?
No, Greg, sorry.
Okay. So is there a potential saturation point for donors if all the sports head strongly into this area, especially with more sophisticated or better promoted entities taking up a lot of the donations space?
Okay, so I would start answering that question with a small anecdote. I was on I had lunch with a gentleman here in Toronto, and he was a big arts donor. And I said to him, why are you, I noticed that you give a lot of money to art. Can you tell me why that is? And his response to me was, well, my wife loves the ballet. And so what about the ballet does your wife like? Well, she loves the social, she likes going out, she likes being dressed. The ballet wasn't a part of it, although I'm sure it was. But there was different motivators, not just the ballet. And he said to me, well, I'm more a sports guy myself. And I said to him, well, that's interesting. Have you ever donated to sport or considered making an investment in sport? He said, no. I asked him why, and he said, because no one's ever asked. And to me, that's a recurring theme, for sure. And all of you have people in your inner circle that aren't necessarily the same people. And you're all going to be, I don't think every single NSF is going to go after the exact same donor. And if you do, your donor's going to choose. I hate to say it. Your donor's going to choose. But the fact of the matter is, start with the people who have the affinity for your sport first, because chances are they're like one sport people, or maybe two. But the fact of the matter is, in this industry, not many people have asked. And certainly in my conversations with most of you who I've had conversations with in the NSF experience and indicated by the poll, that the asks haven't even been made yet. So don't worry about saturation. We're far from being saturated, trust me. And the arts community does it well. You know, symphony asks from the same donors as the ballet, asks from the same donors as various other arts community. If they don't want to give to you, they're not going to give to you. So if you don't ask, though, they're definitely not going to give to you. So I wouldn't be worried about stepping on toes. There's lots of room in this space for everybody.
That's great. I think you probably answered a bit of this with that answer, but I'll go ahead with it anyway. So on the social importance relevance scale, how do the more affluent donors see sport as compared to culture or medical health related causes?
Well, according to last StatsCan research, only 2% of all donations that come into Canada or come from Canadians go to sport. So I would say that the only reason why it's 2% is because nobody really understands sport as they do the arts. I mean, arts and culture is only 6%, but they have a heck of a lot more of the donation pool than we do. So I think that it's an education process right now. I think that Canadians don't understand the value of investing in sport because we haven't done a great job of educating them of it. But when they do, and as we keep, you know, hopefully we all communicate the fact that sport builds leaders, and there's an incredible, you know, the power of sport is incredible to transform the country. We saw it out of Vancouver. We're seeing it progressively as we continue to win on the global stage, as our athletes win. That I honestly think that compared to other charities, like, you know, we don't have the big budgets to do mass campaigns. I come from Plan International, one of the biggest charities in the country, but we had money to do mass campaigns. We're not there yet, but the fact of the matter is if we start with our influencers, start with the people who are closest to you, and then build concentric circles out from that, that eventually will all make sport more relevant in the donor space than it is right now. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know about all of you, but certainly in my stakeholder interviews, there hasn't been a lot of asking from the sport community for individual philanthropic donations.
That's great. Thank you.
Stewardship, and this is the final piece of the puzzle, but it's actually the most important because it's the ongoing relationship. And you know, you take a donation from someone, whether it be $1,000 or $100, or it doesn't matter. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't keep talking to them and stay in front of mind, they won't be recurring gifts. They'll just be one-time gifts. So first of all, you have to make it real. It has to be authentic. And oftentimes a newsletter can do that. It can be super rudimentary. It doesn't have to be glossy, you know, high-end, but just give them some sort of communication that updates them on the impact of their gift, whether it's $10 or $10 million. Give them the impact reports accordingly. Make it personal as much as you can. Obviously, that's going to scale according to the scale of the gift, but the fact is that if someone gives you a transformative gift, like a large gift that puts their name on it, you better tell them exactly where every brick went in that bricks and mortar situation if they built a new facility, for example, and put their name on it. So it depends. You know, you scale the communication according to the size of the gift, but everyone's going to have different level high-end gifts, right, and transformative gifts. Events are great too, and this is where you steward your donors. If you do have events available to you, I've been to numerous events now in the sporting community where I'm looking around saying, where are the donors? Where are the prospects? Where are the people who actually love this sport? Because I'm telling you, this would be a back-of-house experience that they could not buy. And so being able to pitch them on that, or being able to invite people, get them involved in your sport. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt at all. In fact, that it only brings them closer. So it's really important that you leverage the service, because servicing, you know, we always say, well, I don't have time to service. Well, you don't have time not to service a donor, to be honest with you, because otherwise when you have a donor in the door, it's a lot more efficient to service that donor than to acquire new donors. It's a lot more expensive, and it's a lot more time consuming to get people in the door. So once you have them in the door, you know, you can scale it as big or small as you can, as you need to, but, you know, a signed jersey to someone who gives you whatever your bar is, from a development athlete It's available to you, it's inexpensive, it fits in a nice envelope. Like, to me, that would be something that they would cherish. So these are the types of assets that you have to identify, and I think that's part of part of the work that you're going to do over the coming weeks if you're interested in pursuing this philanthropic initiative or these philanthropic programs, is that you're going to identify all of the assets that you have. Every good thing about your sport, whether it be access to athletes, whether it be, wearable T-shirts, or not T-shirts so much, but uniforms and tickets, whatever you have, put them on a big piece of paper. Start there saying, okay, we have all of these things that we can use in order to bring people closer to our sport. Use them. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to use those assets, and you have to identify the assets first, but then use them when you're making your pitch, and then also when you're stewarding your donors. So if you look at the development cycle, which is the next chart, and I would say for the small to mid-sized NSFs, like I said off the top, if individuals are showing affinity to your sport, you have a huge opportunity to identify them as a prospect and cultivate them into a donor. They've already found you. If you're a niche sport or a small sport or a sport that doesn't have necessarily mass appeal, they've already found you. So be aware of your external influencers. Certainly you have small, it doesn't have to be giant brand campaigns. It can be targeted brand marketing. Make sure that your brand represents your sport and represents it well. You can make a tiny little investment in marketing that can go a long way. What's your games performance? I don't care if it's Canada Games, I don't care if it's Pan Am Games or the Olympic Games or World Cup events. Make sure that your donors know how you're performing, how your team's performing, good and bad. Our financial markets have an incredible impact on how much we can get out of our donors. Be aware of it, because making a giant ask in Calgary right now might not be your wisest move. So don't spend a ton of time there until you know that the market or your donor is in a better financial position. Leverage the Olympic brand. If you're an Olympic sport, figure out a way how to link yourself with the Olympic brand. I know that Derek Kent presented not too long ago, and he made incredible, the COC has done incredible work around the Olympic brand, and figure out a way to leverage it. Be creative, again, trying to be creative, and also capitalize on the opportunity that is ahead of you. And even the fact that if you are an Olympic sport, leverage the Olympics. It's a ubiquitous brand. Those rings are ubiquitous. Everybody knows them. In fact, in the world, I would say it's probably one of the most recognized brands in the world. So you have that at your disposal. And so in this, it's a very simple: identify, cultivate, solicit, acknowledge and thank you, keep them engaged, and then steward them so they can then identify more donors for you, cultivate, solicit, and then the circles just get bigger and bigger.
Leanne, this is a time, we've got a question coming from the audience, and Rachel Wilson from Curling has asked a question. Before I get to that question, she also wanted to mention, when we asked about how do you contact their alumni, she wanted to mention that at Curling they've had some good success lately using direct mail, which wasn't one of the choices in the poll, and I think maybe you could comment on if direct mail is been a good avenue for you guys. And then the other question is, how do you create a culture of philanthropy with your athletes so that they help out with your philanthropic efforts?
Okay, so I'll address the direct mail piece first, and thank you to Curling, because Curling probably has a really great direct mail market. Because direct mail is typically targeted to what we call the check writers, who, are comfortable writing checks. They're not doing e-commerce or specifically looking at sort of the more innovative ways to fundraise, but they're a very important part of the pool. However, as you probably know, Curling, direct mail is pretty expensive on a cost per dollar raised from a cost per dollar raised perspective. So just be mindful that your cost per dollar raised is better than what you could do elsewhere. But it's certainly for some sports, I would say, especially those with an older target, an older demographic watching and participating, I would say direct mail is probably a great opportunity. And it also does give you a pool of prospects for major gifts. So if someone gives you $1,000 through the mail, you better be picking up the phone to thank them and ask them for a meeting. So that would be my comment on direct mail. Some organizations can do it really well, but like I said, it's not that it's a little bit expensive if you go down that route, but it can be a great sort of bottom of the pyramid way to get organizations in. And the second question, remind me, Dave, please. I should have written it down.
How do you create a culture of philanthropy amongst your athletes so that they buy in and become part of your effort in your philanthropy?
Absolutely. I think that this is, great question. These are your assets, right? Your athletes are part of your asset pool. And so as they get more and more involved in your organization, especially if they are athletes that are targeted or winning, this whole give back element is incredibly important. And what you don't want to do is have your athletes graduate from your sport and drop off the face of the earth. So the option, I would say the opportunity is to start having those conversations early, but I would also make the introductions to your donor. So for example, if someone's given you a $10,000 gift, you better have an athlete in front of them so they understand the value of what a $10,000 gift means to their experience, whether it be systemic in your sport or their own personal experience. I think leading by example is the best way to get our athletes involved in major gift initiatives. Some athletes will be really shy about it and won't feel comfortable about that, but the fact of the matter is, without this, as part of your sustainable financial success or future success, then your athletes are definitely a major asset.
Thanks, Leanne. And I had one more comment. I think you mentioned earlier about making good use of the Olympic brand, and one of the really easy tools that we, with the COC and with NSF Services, can help you with is to get a hold of the Sport Partner COC logo, get that on your website, as well as include that you are a COC partner within your boilerplate for your press releases. You're talking about some really substantial ways, but there are some really easy, fast ways to make that connection to the Olympic brand, and that is one can be done once and then just sort of fade into the background of what you do, and it becomes part of your everyday.
Yep, absolutely. So very quickly, and it's thank you for your attention. We're getting to the very end, but just to recap, is the identification process is your prospective donors. You move them into a one-time gift. So this is really how you elevate a donor up to potentially a transformative gift if they have the capacity for that. But from a prospect, a one-time gift. So if you take the time after our seminar today or webinar to go to the our foundation website, you can see how we have done a one-time gift or program called Help Build an Olympian, and it's literally a symbolic gift program. Some of you in my plan days, some of you may have bought a goat at one time for your loved one for the holiday season, or a girl scholarship. It really is about getting someone in the door through selling a product. Could be a symbolic product like I just described. So get them in, that way they get in your database. Then you move them up potentially to doing a monthly gift. So it's, if you look at the plan, staying with the plan model, our monthly offering was the child sponsorship. So we would, ding someone's credit card every single month and they would sponsor a child in the developing world. But it was a monthly investment. So figuring out a way to make sure that it's recurring, that your gifts are recurring, a monthly gift is the way to do that. And then if you see that this is going well and their interest is high, moving them into a mid-level gift, and that's usually between $5,000 and $10,000. And with that should come some exclusive donor rewards, programs, events, and depending on your size, of course, a $10,000 gift for some of you would be huge. Huge. For some of you, it would barely pay for, anything. So just be mindful of what that means to your organization. And then investing, so that's your sort of interest level, a true investment where you can restrict the fund. So anything in gray is what we call a general fund gift. So you would never target it towards one thing, or say that, you know, earmark the money to go into one thing. But as soon as you get into major gifts, you have to figure out a way to work more closely with the donor to make sure that their money is going to something that is important to them. And then a transformative gift, of course, is restricted always. Usually it's a bricks and mortar. It could be a research chair or a program naming, or an it could be an endowed gift, for example, where they can create an endowment for us, which is an entire other webinar, but an endowed gift where you can award off the interest in athlete awards or bursaries. But that's a real transformative gift, and that's going to literally transform your sport. So our top 10 takeaways. Identify your gaps, and in thinking about this, it's what are your, what is your case for need? What is it that is going to resonate with the donor, that is going to really speak clearly to them? Simplify it. Don't get all complex. You have to remember, most of these donors, some of them will have come from your sport, and then you can sort of expand that, or be more in detail, but pretend like they don't know your sport and start there, and then you can add layers from there. But also, on the flip side of that is identify your benefits, or sorry, your assets, because that is equally as important. Can you put someone's, name or company name on, even if it's a philanthropic donor? Because there's a difference between sponsorship, right? If you look at the photo, Columbia, that's a corporate sponsorship. They paid to have their logo there. It's not philanthropic. That is not philanthropic. That's sponsorship. A donor would be looking for something else. So identify your assets. Build your database. If it is the only thing that you take away from today, I know it's intimidating, but you can start small, but please start. Please start. Start tracking your alumni information, your athletes information, the people who are in your sport. Make sure you have a database. Find your builders. Those are your champions. Those are going to be out. Those are going to be your little arm that takes out your message. Are you hearing back? No? So these are the champions that you need in order to take your message out, because you can't do it alone. You cannot do it alone. So find your builders, those people who will share your story and actually help you with the asks. Identify your stakeholders, who's important to your brand. Again, champions, but who are going to be investing in your sport, and they could look all, your athletes are your stakeholders, your board are your stakeholders, your volunteers are your stakeholders, but identify them and have more conversations with them. Make smart investments, and it's not just about investments financially. So when you do raise money, make sure that, if you want to contact us about endowment, which is what we're doing with our Sport Endowment for Excellence in Development Fund here at the Canadian Olympic Foundation, but make sure that your money's working for you once you get it in the door. If you're getting money in the door and you're spending it right away without putting any aside for a rainy day, endowed funds are the easiest way for you to take interest off the top and put them right back on to operating costs. So make smart investments, even in marketing. Try things, though. Don't be afraid to try things, but just make sure that if you have an opportunity to do it with, wisely, of course, do it. Leverage your assets. We talked about that. Build a strong communications plan, and it could be on Word. It doesn't have to be fancy and shiny, but it doesn't have to be top shiny communication point and your key messages down, and those key messages go to everybody else. I'm hearing feedback. Create a robust stewardship plan, so make sure that you are taking your donors through the whole cycle. Steward them, keep them in the house, don't lose them, because it's more expensive to get another donor to replace that donor. Impact. We're not great at showing impact in this industry. I think we showcase it in medals, but medals are not the only way to measure the success of sport in this country. So make sure you're showcasing your impact, that even the tiny little incremental steps that your athletes are making, how did that investment make a difference into their lives? How did that investment make a difference into their performance? Showcase the impacts, both from a numerative standpoint or qualitative standpoint, but also from a storytelling perspective. And my last and only point is, don't be afraid to ask. Ask questions. Talk about it. Talk about the fact that you do have gaps, that you do need to raise money, especially with your builders and your champions and your stakeholders. But don't be afraid to ask. It is the biggest mistake that major gift fundraisers make, is they get all the way to the finish line and they don't cross because they didn't make the ask. So if a donor is going to, make an investment in philanthropy, why not make it for you? That's what I say. And that's the end. Thank you so much for your attention. Hopefully you got something. Thank you so much for your attention. And as always, we're here, so don't be afraid to reach out if you have any further questions.
Well, thanks, Leanne, and thanks, Greg. It was a very practical and very insightful session that we've had here today. I think we've clearly identified that as revenue streams go, philanthropy is a very important and very underutilized stream for our sports system in Canada. I think one of the main takeaways I got from this is the fact that our NSF size doesn't really matter. The fact that we can all apply these principles to our sport, and it's just a matter of the scale at which we do it. We all have gaps. We all have potential projects that we can interest donors in. We all have alumni, fans, various stakeholders that we can target. We can develop that communications plan and make that ask. And the other big message I got out of this too was I loved what you said about making your donors feel loved. Because I personally know people that have given hundreds of thousands of dollars to sports and stopped because they didn't feel the love. They were not recognized. They didn't have that stewardship that you stressed is so important. So speaking of loved, I love the fact that this is a very step-by-step approach, and it's something we can all benefit from. And Greg, I loved hearing about what you and Cycling Canada are doing to promote philanthropy and to be a showcase for the other sports that can look at you and learn from what you're doing. I think that's terrific. And what this webinar is all about, this series is all about showcasing what's happening in sport in Canada, and we can all learn from each other on these things. Speaking of learning from each other, we've got 2 more webinars in the spring series here. We've got one on using digital content to drive revenue, and we've got another one on using events to drive revenue. But as our committee, as the Revenue Generation and Marketing Committee of the Canadian Olympic Committee gathers to look at what we're going to be doing for next fall with this Revenue and Marketing Generation webinar series will continue in the fall, we're interested in what is relevant to the sport community that we've got here. And so I would ask all of you to get in touch with Dave Patterson or myself and let us know. What do you want to know? What do you want to go back and drill deeper on some of the topics we've already talked about? If there's fresh topics that you want to talk about, if there's specific speakers you want to hear, let us know. And so I want to thank all of you for participating today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dave to finish up with some housekeeping details.
Thanks, Gene. So Gene just mentioned we do have a couple more webinars coming up in the series. So digital content and the NSF will be on March 26th. And then on May 21st, the webinar on monetizing domestic events will be coming from our partners at Volleyball Canada, who will actually be just coming off a 700-team national championship tournament in Calgary. In between time, we'll be offering a panel at the Sport Events Congress presented by the Canadian Sport Tourism Alliance on bidding and hosting lessons learned. We'll also be working towards the end of the month for a release of a pool of new directors that will be made available for NSFs, where we've worked with a group to come together, come up with a pool of really top-notch, excellent people who are willing and able to serve on NSF boards if asked. And last but not least, certainly at the COC session in Toronto on April 17th, We'll be, as part of that session, we'll be offering a new chair and new CEO orientation session to give people a bit of sense of what it is they've just bitten off here as becoming part of the sports sector and the Olympic family. So we hope everyone who's new to what it is we do around here will join us for that and have a chance to take in some of that information. So thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone sticking around right to the end, as you all did. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Rachel, for the question and the contribution. And we're looking forward to seeing you next time. So have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.